This is Rupert here from T-, and welcome to our series called Working With Tinnitus, where we will be speaking to professionals in the workplace to discuss how they manage their careers and their tinnitus. And tonight's very special guest is a very dear friend of mine and an amazing musician, Mr. Phil Gould. Now, Phil Gould is a drummer, composer, songwriter, and producer who was a founding member and chief architect of the British band Level 42. This group achieved huge international success. Phil toured with this band solidly for 8 years and made countless singles and albums. He is now an independent artist, releasing solo work alongside the many collaborations and soundtrack invitations that he regularly receives. His latest album is out now, and its title is Beautiful Wounds. Phil has had tinnitus and has had a few hearing issues, like many of us that perform in the music industry, but he's very much managed to adapt, attenuate, and maneuver himself around these obstacles and find a very unique path through the tinnitus maze. Welcome, Phil. It's lovely to have you here. Please just tell the community a little bit about yourself, please, Phil.
Hey, Rupert. Great to see you again. Like you, you came from London and moved to Shanklin, but like you, I grew up in Shanklin and little seaside town. And yeah, kind of got into music around the age of 14, 15. I think I've been thinking about it for a lot earlier than that, but finally found an instrument I could really relate to, and drums. So very luckily, because me and my brother, we began making music at the same time, and we lived in quite a big house in Shanklin, on Green Lane. And although my mum, when we moved into that house when I was a baby, my mum and my father, who was a journalist, they had money, so we could buy a big house. But as soon as, within a couple of years of living there, we didn't have any money. So we were quite poor, but we had a big house. My mum was out working, and my father never came back from the Far East, where some of the family were born. I was born in Hong Kong. But so we had the single parent family situation with no dad around. He never came back, and but a big house. So we were incredibly lucky. By the time we got to our mid-teens, we wanted to get into music. We could make all this flipping noise, And my friends on the council estate around the back, some of them were, there was 2 drummers I knew, and of course they lived in council house, so they didn't have the opportunity we have. So we made this cacophonous noise. My mum was really pleased about it and put up with me having drum kits above the kitchen. But my elder brothers, who were still living there, weren't so. But because of that, my brother and I made all this noise, and eventually we left the island around the same time. I was 21 when I went to music college. My brother moved at the same time. He didn't go to music college, but he moved up from the island with Mark King, another musician we met on the island. And then within a couple of years of trying other things with other people, we started jamming together, because we played together on the island, me and my brother, and I played in little situations with Mark. And we thought, well, there's nothing else going on. We better start jamming together. And then we started jamming. I met a guy called Mike Lindup at the Guildhall School of Music, where I did part-time lessons before I went to the Royal Academy. And Mike and I had an immediate connection. And all of a sudden, we get a guy down to hear us. He hears a groove he likes. He said, put a top line on that with lyrics. We did that. We recorded it, put out a single I think it was in June of that year, 1980. And we sold 3,000 12 inches, got licensed to Polydor, sold 80,000 12 inches, because Brit funk, the jazz funk, was the thing at that time. And then we got a 5-album deal. It's unbelievable. So unbelievable times post-punk, where every little record shop, I'm in Islington at the moment, it's in my car, I didn't make it to the venue. And every little record shop had a label, and it was an incredible time, and people putting out records and 12 inches, stuff like that. We were just the beneficiaries of probably the most fortuitous time in the recording industry in this country, where there was so much money around, so much interest, so many small labels. And we made our way onto a major via a small label, like so many did, through punk, a lot of punk bands, the same, And then we went from that to, after about 5 years, we figured out how to write kind of more commercial things, and we had some hits, and then it became a lot bigger. But it was an amazing journey, because we were jamming when I was 22, got signed when I was 23, and I left when I was 30. But it was kind of interesting being in a band with your brother and close friends, because it's like a gang, and then it can become fractious. And also, my elder brother John was our manager for the first 5 years. It's a very family kind of thing. And So all through that period, you know, I never protected my hearing at all. And I used to, you know, then you had on-stage monitors, and we were loud. Yeah. We might sound kind of nice and polite on record, but live we were another band entirely. We were, you know, Mark was incredibly dynamic on stage. We all joined in this kind of energy, and of course, nobody even considered these things then. Nobody talked about it. Even this because Pete Townsend later on, quite famously, hit a lot of ear issues, but we heard about that as we moved into the 90s. I didn't have any discussions about these kinds of things in the 80s when I was in my 20s. So it's like it was, a bit of a shock because I didn't really have any ringing or any problems. I had this numbness after gigs sometimes, but everything was a bit sort of dull. But then I remember having a jam in my early 30s in London with our friend Yolanda, who you know very well. Yeah. Just a little jam, and I remember the guitarist went on his guitar, and it was really loud. I went, oh crikey! And that my left ear started ringing, and that's when it began, you know. And it hasn't really stopped ringing since, but it's ringing, and it was like really kind of noticeable, and then it became more manageable. And I've having discussions with you over many years. Obviously, your situation was a lot more difficult, and a lot more, you know, career threatening than whatever I experienced. So like it was kind of a lot of the advice and knowledge I have to deal with this situation, how to manage it, has come from you, and I've not been in the situation you've been in. It's not been as difficult as what you went through and have gone through and continue to go through. But I had to learn to manage it. And sometimes I didn't take protection. Sometimes I've been doing a gig, I've got headphones in, I've got headphones on because we're using sequences, something like that. I've got earplugs in, I can't hear a thing, and then you just rip everything off because they can hear what's going on. And then, of course, you're putting up with this kind of damage to your ears just to make sure you can make the gig sound good, you know. So as a drummer, you know, I don't play drums as much as I did, but as a drummer, it is difficult to manage that situation. But it's not ever become a situation where I've ever been forced to stop, as I know that what happened to you in your early 20s, where you had to really reconfigure your life based on a situation. You know, you had to deal with it. You know, you had to not do what you were doing at that point, which, you know, obviously one of the saddest things for me was to see you go through that. But you know, it's interesting the conversations you have, and it's like anything, it is about managing it and putting us. And I think one of the key things, talking to you about it, I know you want to get into some questions and stuff, but one of the things, one of the key things that I've noticed over the years is, you know, just general tiredness. You know, if I'm tired, if I don't sleep well, if I push myself, like, and don't have quite a amount of sleep, it gets a lot. It's always been a lot worse. So managing your sleep patterns and making sure when you're monitoring on speakers, like, you know, being musicians, we have to be listening to music all day. Or even on the piano, I have a piano with a practice pedal on it. I can press the practice pedal. I'm not hearing the piano at full volume. But if I'm in front of speakers, you know, just listen quietly, you know, and then take breaks and all these sort of things. But I found that tiredness for me is one of the key triggers of, particularly in my left ear. If I get tired, it's really loud, you know, and then I just have to back away from what I'm doing for a little bit and let it calm down, you know, kind of thing. So I guess people have to manage these situations, and you know, one of the great things about what we've done with this app is to find ways to, you know, to get the brain to again use that word, reconfigure itself to dial out certain things. Is quite an incredible development, really, that kind of approach, I think.
Well, I think you have this amazing way of being able to deal with your tinnitus, because I think you've downplayed it, and that's beautiful in many ways. And that's one of your psychological approaches that I think you understand, but you do it so naturally. And it goes back to a few things, what we've been talking about a lot within the tinnitus community. And it's something that you and I personally spoke about years and years and years ago. And I think this is one of the single elements to your success with your tinnitus is fear. And we always spoke about that. I remember as well, even on your album, The Fear of Fear, the fear of fear itself. And I think you understand fear more than most people. And because you understand it almost on a cellular level, you are able to quantify what is happening to you. So you take the bite and the heat out of your situation, whether it be actually tinnitus or any other situation that you might have encountered. you are very, very good and expert at dealing with those situations because you've dealt, I think, with fear fundamentally, Phil.
Yeah, I had a lot of, one of the things that I was struggling with when I left Level 42 was we were touring non-stop for a long time, but the last 3 years of my 20s were basically without a break. And so you're putting yourself through this, quite high pressure thing, even though you get used to the altitude of, like you get used to whatever you're doing over a period of time. But I was putting myself, and I got a lot of anxiety problems, and I got a lot of, as you know, a lot of panic attacks. So I had to find a way to navigate that, which took a while into my 30s. Yeah. And fear was a huge part of it. Like the idea that, it was going to run away with itself. I think people have this idea with tinnitus as well, that like it's starting in a certain place, it's going to get worse and worse, and it's going to run away with itself. And I think you have to manage those things. You have to deal with what you've got to deal with, but you have to manage the thing in your mind where you blow it up to be, it's getting worse and worse, and it's going to be never going to be any better, and you get into all these stressful mental states because you just anticipate a dark future, and you just have to trust, like, that you can find your way through your own particular issues with this condition, and it might mean serious life changes. I mean, for me, like with you, I know you manage your situation incredibly well because you still play drums and sessions all the time. I'm not actually playing drums that much, so if I was to go on the road, I would then have to take much more serious steps than I do. Like we talked about attenuators earlier and stuff like that, and I think it was a conversation with you. And then the idea is to, like, if I went on the road, I would definitely be very, very strict about if I was playing drums, about how I handled that situation, whether I used in-ears, my ear protection, maybe headphones on, a certain volume setting. You just have to deal with it in a very, fear gets in the way of so many things where you blow things up to be even worse than they are. They might already be bad, or you're not comfortable with it. But if you get stressed with fear, then you really don't have. It just gets in the way of the process of dealing with these issues and resolving these problems.
Fantastic, Phil. And I see you being a healer in many ways. Again, you would never say this, and you would never admit to that. But I think you're not just a drummer, and as I said before, I think you're an incredible musician. You're an artist, which is the final frontier of anybody aspiring to be a top musician. And you're a great artist. But what you are, which I think is fascinating, and I wrote some notes about it, and I'd like to read this to you because I think this is what a lot of us are, and a lot of people in the tinnitus community. And again, I learned so much from you when we used to talk about Carl Jung, and the idea that you are like Chiron, which is the Greek wounded healer, and I believe that to be all of us in this tinnitus community. And it was a term created by the psychologist Carl Jung. The idea states that an analyst is compelled to treat patients because the analyst himself is wounded. And the idea may have come obviously from those mythological roots. But I see you as being completely of that nature. I find that with you, whether you have tinnitus and whether you're drumming, you're able to totally take it out and take the heat out of your system. I find it extraordinary. I don't know many that are able to do that. And you deal with it on an incredible level, Phil. I don't think you even realize what you actually do. So I think if you went on tour with a little bit of attenuation, I think you'd be absolutely fine. You would not have an issue. Incredible.
Yeah, it would require a certain kind of discipline, because I went down to Shell Abbey and before Christmas did a little drum chat. Dave helped me out with something because we wanted to use the kit that's there, and I just put headphones on with no earplugs. I took 2 hours and I just was really cavalier about it, which is not the way you need to be. I was just really being cavalier. But if I was to go and play, if I was to be in the studio all day doing drum tracks or go on tour, I would be much more disciplined about it, because I can get away with that for a couple of hours having not played for a while. But if I was to be playing regularly, then you would have to be much more disciplined. And all those things require a kind of discipline. You're trying to manage anything to do with your physical problems or emotional problems. I had a lot of knee problems the last year. If I was to be playing drums, I would have to definitely be really careful not to do certain things, because I did something stupid and then couldn't play, you know. But it's interesting that, thank you for your comments. I really appreciate that. But it's interesting. I think all art at a level where integrity is involved, where people are passionate about what they do and that they want to have a conversation, is all about, to be honest, all about healing. Because, like, when you think about it, you're either a damaged individual yourself and you're trying to make sense of the world by writing poetry or music or painting a picture, or you're dealing in subjects which are very difficult, a lot of the times. I mean, you're not gonna move people by just painting lovely pictures. I mean, it's lovely to see pictures of the sun, it's great. But the real things that move us are Guernica or something like that. Something that's got power and it really blows you away. Or like if you look at Van Gogh's pictures, the last year that he was in the last year of his life when he was in the asylum, you're looking at pictures of a man whose mind is on fire, who's like really struggling with this breakdown. So what do we get out? We don't want any human being to be in that situation. But what we get out, he put that on canvas for us to sort of be able to. He did that for our benefit. Like all great art is about that kind of thing where you have a kind of conversation. And I'm not saying what I'm doing is great art, but you need to be having that mentality to do things that's going to move people. Otherwise, you're not. What's the point? But like I was reaching out through songs in a way to find validation in how I felt. If people agreed with me, then I wasn't quite as mad as I thought I was when I was 17, And that's so. But then other people go, "Hey, I feel like that as well." And then some people might say, "Hey, you're speaking for me." That's the ultimate thing when you can actually put something in music or on paper or whatever, or maybe a movie or whatever it is, that people feel themselves not quite so alone because they identify with that feeling or that way of looking at something, and that's just a beautiful thing. I've been through periods in my life where there's some particular songs I had to have in my life that really helped me through some very difficult moments. So, and I know, we've had these passionate conversations about music and lyrics and songs down the years, and just what it can do for people. Like to have that in their, there's always going to be a song out there, or a poem, or a book, or a piece of music that's going to reflect any state or emotion that you might find yourself in. So it's kind of fascinating to be part of that conversation, even on I'm not in that echelon of that we all, the Bowies and these Lennons, the kind of people that we all just look up to. But we're part of a conversation. It's about making a contribution at whatever level you're at. So it's kind of it's a beautiful thing, if you get that possibility to share some experience that people can then relate to. Yeah, it's amazing.
Absolutely, Phil, and absolutely. But I would say you are on that level. You very much remind me of Satie, people like that. That's who you remind me of. These great piano players. I mean, not only are you a beautiful drummer, but you're a fantastic piano player. And it's interesting, isn't it, talking about that? The idea that you're creating something because there's a need to, because you have to express. Yeah. Either that sadness or that fear or that emotion that's so deep. And I think for me it's always been that, probably since the tinnitus, really, when I was 22. It's the idea of everything. For me is kind of, there's always a broken thread to everything, which I don't mind. It's just in pretty much everything. So if there's a great piano sound, it's offset by something that's not so great and slightly broken. There's it's kind of the way I see it is like, I think my mantra, although I'm trying to stop it now, because I'm trying to move on from it. I think I have actually moved on. So, which is the idea of harmony and beauty, trying to create that, but through conflict as my train track through harmony and beauty. And it's like, I think it's so intrinsically inside me now. So if I'm taking your piano sound, Phil, I mean, I hope you don't mind me kind of manipulating in a way, but it's like, I see it as being something else now. It's like there is that, but I love that impressionistic idea of what I feel it could be when you turn it into sepia or you give it another emotion other than the literal. Oh, it's like creating a world for it, I guess.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. I mean, it's interesting that what you're doing with this app and these discussions you've had with audiologists and people in this field. It's like I remember walking around the Tate with Robin Scott, who's this wonderful musician who I had my first recording experience with. He wrote a song called around the state looking at some Francis Bacon pictures on the wall, and he just started talking about this concept of beautiful wounds, and I'd never heard it before. And what he meant, what Bacon did all these paintings where he had, you know, meat with cuts and slashes in it, and used that as kind of an allegory for the damage that's done to all of us in life, and how much more beautiful we are as a result. You know, the damage that's inflicted on us through life itself, or the things we experience, or even that we inflict on ourselves. It's not good. It makes you more beautiful. It makes you more compassionate, more empathetic. Like what you've done with and this is exactly what you've done with your tinnitus problem. You started so young, and it got to a point where you had all these things you had to deal with, and you had to remove yourself from a possible life of a touring. Well, I think you were one of my favorite drummers, one of the best drummers in this country. But you would have been on the level of those guys like Ash and Carl and Jeremy, known as what you are as a great drummer, because you were being out there in the world. You had to give up on that life, but you've taken all that suffering and that horrible, almost tragic, impact at the age of 22 to have to remove yourself from this future that you planned for yourself. You took that and you turned it into something that's going to benefit all these people across the world, who've had this problem like you, and are maybe struggling to find information or where to deal with it, or feel isolated in their problems. That's the beautiful wounds, Rupert. That's taking your damage and your problems and turning it into something wonderful, because when you go through those issues, it's the foundation of all empathy and compassion. When you yourself have hit the wall with something, and then you go, oh, okay. But you can't fully understand what it's like to have a breakdown when people suffer depression until you've really been through that. You go, oh, okay. And then, I don't want anybody to experience that, but I've experienced that. So when I know people are in trouble with depression or anxiety, I can have conversations with them and maybe help them through it, because I came through it. And the same with you, I've done with tinnitus. You're doing, how you manage your own tinnitus. What you've done with your own situation is like off the scale more, even heroic, I would say, than mine, because you've had to confront so much more. 6 different sounds, all this. I mean, this is incredible, and I know it's probably driving you out of your mind at one point. But look at what you've done with it. You've turned it into a positive contribution. This is the best thing about human beings, to take these negatives and turn them into something positive. It's just the most astonishing thing. And we all need that. We all read books and we go, wow, that life that they look at what they've done. Or we find a musician that was, they turned it into this thing. It's part of the thing that we require from each other, to be reminded of the power that we have as humans to overcome.
You're absolutely right, and honestly, that's lovely what you're saying, and it's it was something completely different. You're right, and well, how can I express that in a way that I can make sense of the madness? And it was like, rather than like a breakdown, when you have that kind of tinnitus, or you have anything that's insurmountable, and you think, well, okay, I'm alive, but I'm walking around at 3 o'clock in the morning, but I'm not really myself anymore. My personality's completely kind of upended itself. I'm in a state of nothingness, and I know you know that. And it's like, so it was like a breakthrough in a way. This kind of like, well, what am I going to do? And the thing that just kept hitting me more and more was that it was sound. That was the thing that kind of, in a sense, put me in this position. But I always knew really deep down that it was sound that was going to get me completely out of it, and not just out of it, but it was going to transform the situation. So it was a great thing to be able to be a musician. And like you, it's so funny where we came from, Shanklin, that when we first met that many years ago, and it's like we discovered that we listened to almost exactly the same music. It was crazy. It was just
must be something in the area, because we had, you've explored areas of drumming that I haven't got into, with jazz and brushes, but we did have very similar concepts. It must be the way we use grace notes and grooves and stuff. It must be the Shanklin air,
It very much is, and it's like you're saying though about the appropriate music that fits the certain type of expression and feeling that you have. And I'm so grateful for the music of Miles Davis, because in a way that prepared me for that expression. It really did. And you're talking about art, and for me it was Monet that really blew my mind, that the Impressionists. So, you know, his later life was when he was free, and that's what always kind of appealed to me. Was so later on, it was during, would have been, I think, World War II. So he was confined to base. He went back to his home, and he let just basically everything just grow, everything around him, and he stopped. Well, he changed his style, and it was so gregarious and brave and brazen. And that's because he couldn't see. I mean, he literally was losing his eyesight, and so he was just throwing emotion and color at the canvas. And I felt, I'm not comparing myself to any of those people. I'm just saying I was inspired by those people, by Miles Davis, with this thread of darkness and beauty and heaviness and spiritual kind of awakening. It had everything. My feeling when I listened to Miles Davis when I was really young was the feeling of ascension, the idea that I could kind of come from something and turn into something else. It felt possible. And so it was very similar with Monet, the idea that you've got these brazen people that are taking so many risks, and they don't care what people think. They're doing it purely as the most ultimate selfish act, but not selfish. It's beautifully selfish, like a lot of artists. They're doing it because they've got nothing else. So they've got to have this emotion out. They have to deliver it. And so for me, the idea of having the music and dealing with people like you, who is a very deep, really, really incredible thinker, and being able to really kind of quantify what's happening and make sense of it by talking to you. I mean, you are a great source of comfort and really inspiring. Not really now, even as a musician, because we never really talked ever about drums. We talked about things. We talked about the universe and how we're affected by it. So our friendship really is, I mean, although we've done music together, our friendship more than anything is more based around life itself. It's very, very different. And I think that's in a sense, you're one of the people that I got a lot of solace and help from, even if maybe you didn't realize it, but you gave me so much time and you understood it and you listened. And I mean, that's incredible. I mean, you had a lot on your plate as well. You had loads of things going. You had 3 children, you had a marriage, you had everything, like with music. There were so many commitments, you know, I mean, Christ. So yeah, you're very, very, very unselfish with your listening towards the condition that I was going through, and many others. I know you help people. I mean, it's incredible, Phil. I mean,
Thank you, Rupert. Well, you know,
it's great to be able to tell you this, and whether it, I mean,
I really appreciate it.
Conversations, but it's actually nice. It's actually really beautiful just to share that with you amongst the community, so they know people like.
I really appreciate it. I mean, I absolutely really appreciate it, Rupert. You know, thank you so much for those, you know, incredible words. You know, but we had one of the things that I felt for you in the situation you were in at the age of 22 was that one thing I have, obviously now I'm a lot older, I've learned through life, is that acceptance is the key to any kind of you know when you have a condition that you don't want. I want this. You have to have acceptance, whether it's panic attacks or tinnitus or maybe even an ailment, a physical ailment. You say, this is who I am, you know. And it's much harder to do that when you're in you're younger, in your teens or 20s, because you have an identity that you're trying to fashion, you know. And as you get through life, you just strip all these layers away. So it's much easier to go, okay, like, you know, when I left Level 3, I couldn't perform for work because I panicked at. So, like, you know, I just had to accept that. And for a while I was going, I don't want to accept that. How can I accept that? You know, just come off, you know. And then, but it's funny, as you get older, you get to that place quicker than maybe you do when you're younger. So I know that you went through a lot of these struggles because you were a young man. It took a long time to really accept where you were, and then begin to process it and fathom how to deal with it, you know, because it is difficult. So, like, maybe one thing that would be incredible to try and get across in all the, I know you're working with various people on this, is to try and get into younger people's world who are having this condition, because they're the ones that probably will be struggling with the most with their self-identity and saying, I don't want this in my life. How dare, you know, what happened? Why did I have to be like this? You know, like, we all have that. Like, why have I got this problem? But, like, if you can, you know, kind of help people, you know, calm people's nerves when they get a situation and see there is a way through this. There is you can have a future, you can navigate your way through this, and you can deal with it. So maybe that's the greatest thing, you know. Got to try and reach those people.
You're absolutely right. It's interesting you say about acceptance, because your piano playing is on an album that I've made, which is the whole thing is called Journey to Acceptance. That's it. You know, and it's like the idea was to explore. So you take big, fairly negative emotions, but the idea is that if you put a word in the sky, then you're forced to deal with it. For example, fear. So if I put fear in my consciousness and I kind of take ownership of it, take self-responsibility for it, I paint a picture of it, i.e. with the music, then somehow I'm working my way through it. Even though maybe I would say that I've probably looked at that many years ago, I still need to oil the engine. I still need to keep looking at these things and look at it in a different way. Maybe I see it one way. So the idea was to take guilt and shame were the really big ones, actually, that nobody ever really talks about, because I think it's so intrinsically big. And so I was exploring those emotions of sadness, distrust, shock, and then created, which is the track you're on, which you performed. And you wrote that lovely bit at the end, which is the idea of this place, which is this safe cave. So no matter what happens amongst that myriad of quite negative emotions, you've got this safe place that you can always take time out to. And I felt like I always had that. So as much as it got heavy, and it got crazily heavy, and I know it did for you, I felt that always with music or with something, there'd always be a place I could go to. And funnily enough, it was always the drum set, Phil. It was always the drum kit, even though it was the thing that was making things more complicated. It was always going back to the drum kit. And I know that you used to, you know, very lovingly and jokingly, you would go, "Why aren't you playing ghost notes? What is wrong with that?" I don't think I don't think I played them for about nearly 7 or 8 years. And the idea was that it was just interesting. So I had to take the kind of disability and think, well, if I really that snare drum and I create a different sound from the hi-hats, or I do something with the bass drum, and I have this really super damp kit like the 1970s, somehow that I could make a different style happen or something else happen. And really, as a result of that, it meant that actually the way that I then played the drums, or I did the sound of the drums, it kind of, you know, now in retrospect, it's why I really enjoy making sounds, because I think I've come from a place where I was forced to have to go in another direction. Otherwise, I think I probably would have carried on with the same type of sound. So it's forced me into a completely different world.
That was the most fascinating part of your journey in a way. One of the fascinating parts of your journey was the way the drummer that you became through all of this negotiations and conversations you had with yourself and trying to figure it out. So you went from being, I remember like seeing you play in London in the mid 90s with like 3 rack toms on the floor, and it's like rock, and it had this kind of fusion sound. And then in order to navigate this issue with your hearing, you ended up buying these very thin, dry cymbals, probably smaller than a lot of people use. You had small toms, or sometimes you had big toms, but you had in carved heads, or you cut the kick down, so it was like, instead of being like that, it was like this. And you know, these hi-hats. And I mean, one of my most favorite parts of the album that I've been working with you on, because I played on your kit a couple of times, which I have to acknowledge. And one of my favorite drum sounds of all time was a track we did together, and playing on your kit, and you had this ridiculous, this Vortexian DI thing that had this scrunchy thing, and just playing so quietly with this massive sound coming out of the speakers. And you found a way to do that to right, I can't be sort of like, you know, be born a mask about it, but you found a way to make these really big musical sounds and statements, playing with incredible, you know, dynamics and refinement. But you weren't leathering the drums, but you had these massive sounds. It's a fascinating journey, because you see, you can go into a session at Chad Abbey or on all these records you've done, and you make, you know, your groove is really, you're playing within yourself in a kind of dynamic way, but you're not, you know, in order for me to play kind of really in the pocket, often I'd have to really kind of get quite aggressive with the drums, you know. But you can be there without this, you know, and you're playing really quietly, but it records incredibly well because you dialed in the sounds. It just shows what can happen if you take the acceptance. This is the condition. This is who I am. This is where I find myself, and I'm going to work my way through this, because drumming and music is through this maze of how to deal with it. It's quite amazing. So if somebody, you know, you see pictures of your kit. If drummers see your kit, sometimes you got tiny kicks. The toms are really low. You know, the snare drum's just got something on it, and everything's really like that. And it's amazing. And then you look at this kit. Well, that's not going to do anything, is it? And then you hear it, and you go, recorded. It's like one of the great drum sounds. So that's a fascinating journey to create as a musician, to be you're completely yourself as a musician. Whenever I hear you play a track, I just know it's you, which is the hallmark of anybody that wants to identify a musician. You've got to have your own thing, you know, and like you got to sound like you know, and you sound like yourself, but you've had to adjust it from where you were, your thinking process in your late teens, early 20s, from what you were heading towards, to be something entirely different, which is quite amazing. But it shows what you can do to get through this stuff, you know.
Well, it was an honor to play on your last record, Phil. My God, I mean, we laughed, actually. Dave Granshaw, who was doing a great job of recording the sound, we had a couple of moments when you went off and had a cup of tea. We both had a couple of Phil Gould moments, and we went, I won't swear, but I said, flipping heck, it's a Phil Gould record. You know, it's like, what the hell am I doing here? And, you know, it was fantastic, but it was great because you asked me to play on it and you asked for something else. So it wasn't the kind of standard thing. And it was a great honor to play on your record, man. And it shows that journey was really worth it, because I think maybe had I not gone on that journey, I probably wouldn't have played on your record. I think, you know, it would have been a different sound, and you wouldn't have needed that sound. You would have covered it yourself, you know. So, yeah.
Oh, that's great. You do realise you've got the only drum solo on my record. I didn't get a drum solo. You got the drum solo. You stole my drum solo.
How did I do that? Because I don't really play lots of notes. So how did I get away with that? Was that you?
Well, there was that track Open Wide. There's a kind of breakdown, and like, you know, where everything stops, and you were just sort of filling in. You may not have even thought that would just be used, but it sounded so great, so we used that. So it's great. This drum, this, you know, amazing drum kind of fill stuff leading back into the track. You know, I had to use it. Yeah, it was great. Yeah, it's a fun time. But you know, for me, the whole thing about recording is the opportunity to be in a room, in a collective situation with great talented people, and that's the thrill of it. You know, and you know, that's what you work towards, trying to get back to that situation every time. You know, because that's what it's all about. It's the fun of it. And it's kind of interesting how we're on the same page in so many ways as musicians, even though we're incredibly different. You know, we would have played drums just so differently, but we know we kind of really understand each other, things like that. You know, and it's like interesting to be in a studio with, to watch how you could navigate this. You know, again, going back to Tinnitus, when you did that track, rhythm track, to Open Wide, how you played that, and how you. I was quite amazed that you actually you were playing the drums for a long time. You're probably playing drums for several hours, and it was like, wow, this is really cool, because it was great for me to see, because it meant that you weren't being hindered in what you wanted to do by this condition, which maybe 10 years before you would have had to say, I can only do this, can only do this much. So it's kind of really impressive to watch that. And yeah, it was great. I mean, to be honest, when I'm working with you now, I often forget that you've got to manage that situation, because you deal with it so well now, you know.
It's brilliant. Oh, thank you so much. I mean, amazing what you're saying. I mean, we've got a great question here, and you have answered it. But I'm going to just do it one more time, which is a lovely chap called Ben Whedon, who's another guy. He did some research for our tinnitus community. He was really great, really thorough, lovely gentleman. And he was a musician and is a musician. He came from Green Lanes as well. And
really?
I think he lives in Surrey or London now. So he's a researcher. But he was just talking about anxiety. And I know you spoke about it, but like, I'll just read the question out. So, hi, Phil. Pleasure to hear you talk. I wondered how you handled the anxiety. And do you feel that you've got on top of it over time?
Yeah, I have. It took a while to figure it out. It took a while to even understand what was going on. I think, like most people, when you start having these kind of problems, like panic attacks, you think you're going mad, or you just think, well, I must be abnormal. There's something really wrong. You don't realise this is such a commonplace condition. And I remember like having a panic attack. I was in Toronto. I was in North America, and I did a radio interview. Had a panic attack, and I got them to take me to the hospital, and was shocked when I got to the hospital. They gave me a brown paper bag. I said, "What's this?" It's kind of an insult. I thought I needed medication. I'm dying, but it was just a panic attack, and they said they needed carbon monoxide. They were hyperventilating. And then the unfortunate thing for me was like during that period, I was coming to a point of a nervous breakdown because I've been stressed out with so many things, touring so much and all the stresses of that. And then I had a panic attack on stage, which is really terrifying because then all of a sudden, like you're going to have a panic attack every time you walk out on stage, and that was the end. About a week after that happened. The last gig I did with 1142 was in a club in Dallas, big club in Dallas, and I was having a panic attack as I walked out all the way through the gig. So my extremities were just tingling, with this hyperventilation. And I thought I was literally sort of dying. I got on a plane the next day, and they went back to see my doctor, and he put me in hospital on a sleep cure for 2 weeks. Took me off the road, But I got to a place like that because I didn't have any information or any knowledge of what was happening. I had no help. And it took me a couple of years after I came out off the road to figure it out, like what was going on. And there were certain moments where one of the keys to accepting was acknowledging that this is not just me. There's a lot of other people in the situation. And the reality was, I having been through it, having been probably the worst experience of hyperventilation, where you're on stage 2 hours, you can't get off. That didn't kill me. And if I figured I had to go towards this, I have to, like we talked about acceptance, I have to acknowledge this is where I am, and I have to go towards the light. I can't just run from it. I'm going to go towards it. So whenever I had a panic attack, I would just dive into it. See, and it was just really uncomfortable. And but I began to kind of fathom out that, I began to trust myself that it was never going to get beyond a certain point. The only problem I began to have, had to deal with for a while, was the fact that if I went on stage, I'd be confronted with that. If I did an interview, I might have a huge rush of adrenaline, all this sort of thing. So I had to acknowledge it. And now I did an interview on Radio 4 a few years ago. I don't know, my sister got me on the radio. We talked about Cremona the Farm. Do you remember that conversation I had on the radio about Cremona the Farm?
I love that. Yes.
And I was sat next to Sebastian Folks, and there was like these two people on Radio 4. This woman, the woman that was doing the kind of researching and interview, was like going to Oxford. I mean, these people were super bright. I was sat next to Sebastian Folks, and I had this ridiculous. And it was the first time I had panic attack for about 10 years. But I sat there, and in my mind said, "Oh, you again? Oh, you're back? Are you? Okay, well, hello, old friend. How are you?" And by the time the red light went on, I was totally fine because I could trust myself that it wasn't going to linger. It wasn't, it was only going to be a temporary state. And once you start acknowledging it and adapting to it, you can acknowledge, it's not going to be like, this isn't going to last all day. This isn't going to kill me. This blah 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 blah. And then you figure out a way to deal with it. And now I can go on stage. And even now, when I do a drum clinic or something like that, I might have an echo of that question.
Yeah.
What's going to happen? But as soon as I'm behind the kit on stage, the question's gone. It's not even an echo of an echo now. It's like just a little ripple in my mind of something that happened long ago, But it took a lot of working out as to what was going on, and a lot of acceptance and figuring out how to manage it without medication, which I had to use for some time.
Yeah.
But I think just very briefly, one of the ways I did resolve it was using flotation tank. And I go into a flotation tank and I say, "Come on, baby, let's have it then." And I go into this flotation tank, the sensory deprivation, and whatever was at the back of my mind. And I remember having one enormous acid flashback, panic, whatever it was, just completely, in the flotation tank. And weirdly, during the course of this particular massive panic attack, everything's dark, and it's like complete sensory deprivation. You're in water, but you're floating in this darkness. And I remember, this arm was up in the air because when I was playing, the last iteration of my time level, I had this massive drum kit, like 4 racks on the 2 floors, and the ride cymbal was right over there. There's an awful lot of stress in playing the ride, and my arm was in the air, like it was like all that stress in my arm was coming. It was really bizarre. So after that, this like I was seeing mandalas in my eyes, like a real trippy thing, and then after that, it was kind of over. I I went towards it, and I didn't run. I didn't escape from that room. I stayed with it, and I allowed what was at the back of my mind, whatever was troubling me, whatever needed to be expressed by my brain, to come out. I think a lot of people use language like, I'm going to fight this thing, I'm going to go to war with it, I'm going to sort of beat this, you know. I think you have to work with whatever condition you have, whatever problems health-wise you have to work with it, you have to acknowledge it, and you have to go towards it, and you have to then allow it room and listen to what it's saying to you. But anxiety doesn't come from nowhere. Anxiety, for me, I think, my own interpretation of anxiety is a lot of repressed feelings that you don't have space in your mind, or you don't have room to deal with, and they just build up to the point where you have an overload, sensory overload. And I think this is my interpretation. It could be somebody that, you know, somebody could completely disabuse me of that if they wanted to, but that's how I felt it was, that I allowed space for the stuff that I'd repressed and wasn't dealing with to have its say. And then after that, I began to calm down. And I think probably the beginning of by the end of the 2000s, I could then go on stage and do all this, you know. So it was a long journey, but it was kind of like interesting to really understand how so much of these things, like we talked about acceptance, really accepting it. So if you're depressed, don't pretend you're not. If you've got panic attacks, you go, don't pretend you're not having a panic. You go like, okay, this is where I am, and then you listen to it. And now I'm quite dismissive of my anxiety. If it turns out we go, oh, you again, you know. And I just laugh at it. And then, come on, then, if you're going to do something, see what you can do. You know, let's have it. You know, what's the worst you can do? Because the worst that I could ever experience with anxiety happened to me in that club in Dallas, where it just went off the charts. You know. So there's never ever going to be like that again. So I know that for a kickoff, and then from that point you just you know, you work your way through it until it's manageable, and you treat it with the disdain it deserves.
Absolutely. And it's interesting what you're saying, because, you know, just going back to the thing about, you know, when you're really young, or at any age, if you're doing something and it's new, that when we don't have the thing that maybe a sportsman has when you get to that high level. We don't have a team of professionals that are helping us, massaging, helping us with our psychology, like Clive Woodward with the rugby team. You know, we don't have any of that. And I was even sort of joking with James, because also, as you know, you're on the label and he runs the label. You almost feel that with some artists now that are coming up, not all, but there needs to be some sort of, in a way where they don't feel obviously ostracized or that it's heavy, but some sort of beautiful psychiatric kind of proper evaluation whereby you could kind of really help them, because it might be that some crazy decisions are being made along the line just based on the inadequacies that maybe one person might feel, that if they were to overcome it, they could maybe tour and live that gigging life and existence and go and record, rather than actually maybe it never gets off bat because maybe they don't get the help, and you feel like you really do need that help. And I'd like to think that with guys, particularly like yourself, and I know for myself, is that, you know, we've done the opposite. When kind of in a way, when the shit hits the fan, we are there for it, because when that red light comes on, I know you feel the same. I very much feel the same. It's like, no matter what my situation is, and it's exactly what you're saying. You can't fight it or go to war with it as such. It's an energy that you need to work with. You need to work through it. And then you start to understand the way that you are and the way that it is. And then you start to react, and you perceive that it as either non-threatening or threatening, in which case we do something about it. But when that red light goes on, right, I'm ready for it. And no matter what happens, for some reason as well, for me, I might have had maybe a day where maybe there's more tinnitus than usual. But when that red light comes on, it's all gone. And you know, it's like the way I visualize it, it sounds like I'm going to war, but it's not a war as such. It's like, it's only just stopped about 2 years ago, but I'm going into the gladiatorial arena, and I'm actually going to either die or I'm going to survive. But either way, I'm not afraid of what the outcome is, because I'm there for that total role, which is to do the best I can for the music. And I'm so densely and heavily focused in it that really nothing else matters. If I was to cronk it and not be here anymore, so be it. If that was the situation. And I think it's that absolute commitment that I think we all share when we're really, really passionate about whatever our expressive art form or whatever it might be. It's the same thing as a sportsman. It's like you have to put it aside and you really focus. But it's true what you're saying. I mean, it's like it is definitely a situation where you're not at war with it, for sure. I totally grab it. I that resonates with me, Phil, massively.
What's really interesting about what you're saying is like, because this is kind of in a way the basis of the app that you produce, T- app, is that you can, you know, like I've had this as well. I'd be in the studio and all of a sudden my ears ringing or something like that, and then a conversation begins and I've got to play a keyboard part or something like that, and just because you dial it out, it's just dialed out, and it's even to the point of like sometimes I've felt the tinnitus was quite loud, and then I get on with it, and I've forgotten it for the rest of the day. So it's just the way the mind can actually dial it out in that way that you construct it with the app, that you can use this kind of methodology to sort of really tone down the tinnitus and dial it out, and to get you to a place where you can, you know, it's not. You trick, I don't know, maybe it's a trick you're playing on your mind, or you just get into something and all of a sudden that's not the most, because you're not thinking about that the whole time, so you go on this direction. It's quite an interesting approach, and I have the same thing that you have. Like if I get into a recording session, a piece of music, then I might, maybe I've not much sleep, wake up, go, that's a bit loud. But then all of a sudden, within 45 minutes of having a conversation, let's maybe use this sound on this track, and it's gone. It's like not there. It's not like gone because I'm. It's not gone because I'm doing something else. It's literally gone because it's just not ringing anymore, because I've actually my mind has gone to another place with where it needs to be. It's a very interesting process, you know.
Very much so. I've seen you do that. I've seen you do that all the time. Actually, you might even you've never complained, but I might say, "How are you?" and you might say, "Yeah," and I mean, "How are you? Your tinnitus?" And you might say, "Yeah, it wasn't great at lunchtime, but." But you say, yeah, but anyway, you know, what are we doing now? So, and I know that you do that, and you'll go back into the studio. You then may not even discuss anything like that for 2 or 3 days, and you literally are able to absolutely dismiss it. But you do it so magnificently. It's not like you're pretending it's not there. You just literally are, right, I've had enough. Right, what am I doing? Right, okay. This is very important now. So I'm not going to indulge it. I'm not going to give it any energy. I'm not going to give it any time. I now need to give time to this. And your focus, I think, in many ways is the thing that has, well, it's stopped you being a prisoner to the tinnitus. Because I think when you've described your tinnitus, it's as bad as most people's is bad on a not a great day, but you really do not let it affect you at all. You've never complained of it. And actually, it's only when I ask you, yeah.
Well, I'm working with yourself, people like David at the Tel Abbey, or people, my friends Fabio. When I'm working with musicians in studios, everybody's so they're not into just cranking it and having it really loud, so it's kind of really all manageable. We play we're in the studio for long hours. We record and play back at a really good volume. We all manage it really sensibly. We're not pushing the envelope. It's not like, you know, and my days of my 8 years on the road of, you know, absolutely hammering it with this volume. Of course, that's a long time ago, so you can manage it well. So it's not like you can just do anything you want, but you have to be really careful, and we are careful. I mean, you know, you're really careful with your ears. I take, you know, often I've had the slip here and there, but I try and take great care. And also working in a great room like in Tel Abbey, the volume we're working at is always really, you know, hear everything perfectly, but we're not coming out there going, geez, you know, we're not having, you know, that kind of, you know, throbbing eardrums because of the volume. You have to be practical with these things, as well. You know, if you want to lead a life musician that involves sound stuff, you just have to really manage it and be really sensible the whole time. And you know, you can't expect to manage it and accept things and then go into a studio and have really loud speakers. You can't expect to be able to have, you know, your tinnitus to be able to deal with that situation. So there's all, you know, a lot of sensible thinking behind the way when we record or when you in these great studios. You have to be really, you know, we have to be sensible. You know, that comes into it as well. And acknowledge where you are. I have this thing, so I'm not going to go and crank the speakers. I'm going to do this. There's not a lot of that kind of attitude comes to bear when you acknowledge and accept where you are with it. I've got this situation, so now I'm going to deal with my music making like this. I'm not going to, thwack away and have it really cranked up and do, have 100 dB mixes play back to me.
Yeah.
So it's kind of it's a lot of those things you come to understand when you work your way through these issues and accept where you are, and then figure out, well, this is the way I can deal with it. This is how I can have it. For you and I, as drummers, attenuators or earplugs under headphones or recording, absolutely. And attenuators are amazing because they don't take the frequency down, but they do adjust the volume. So you're when it comes to this stuff, you're a fountain of knowledge and information. And anybody who's struggling with this, he needs to go through T- and the whole ecosystem you built around this app, because there's so much great information and knowledge that you've got that can help people. And I hope we can spread this information as wide as possible.
Thanks, Phil. I've got one more question, if that's all right. It's from one of the members of our community, a chap called Peter. Let me see if I can find it here. So, from Ben Whedon. Thanks, Phil, for being so candid. This is super interesting and helpful. That's very nice, Ben. Lovely. This is Peter. He said, sorry to put you in this chat by mistake. For Phil and Rupert, do you use I need my other glasses, i.e. in-ear, do you use in-ear monitors now when you play? And if you do you feel they help maintain your hearing?
I don't know about you, but I used in-ear monitors when I did that theatre piece, because there's no on-stage sound, and I really didn't like it very much. No. I didn't like how the sound being produced that close to my eardrum. So I would prefer, eventually, halfway through the run, I said, look, can I use headphones? And that looks unsightly, but I'd rather use, have earplugs or attenuators we talked about.
Yeah. And
use normal headphones. I know it doesn't look great, but I'd rather have the sound produced a bit further away from my eardrums.
Me too.
And I know a couple of really, and there's one of the UK's top drummers who's used in-ears for years and are really struggling with his ears now. Because it's a lot of sound to produce in a very close proximity to the eardrum, I think. But a lot of people swear by them, and possibly if I'd have used those 3x20s, I might not have even had the hearing problems I did have, because we had on-stage monitors and it was loud as hell, So I'm not a massive fan of in-ears, but I understand why people use them. But I've got these DT770s. It's what are they? It's a Sennheiser DT770, and they're kind of quite big, and they're set back away from the eardrum.
Oh yeah, they're great headphones.
A lot of padding around, so they're over here,
Yeah.
But you talked about attenuators, and I'm going to get some attenuators. We're going to talk about that. I think that's the next step for me to get, rather than earplugs. Because hopefully this year we'll be playing live a bit, and I need to work on that.
That's it, Phil. And Jono at ACS is going to give you a free set, so that would be just tremendous. They're brilliant, Phil, and that's what I use. And I think in-ear monitors, I agree with you, probably would have been great for when I was younger, and also if I'd have had the education, and if I'd have learned to understand how loud I should have them. But yeah, for when the damage is kind of done and I need to just protect my ears now, definitely I would agree with you. Attenuating earplugs plus some headphones on the top, for studio work or like live sound where you need to have a sequencer or something running in the background. I totally agree.
I think that's the answer to a lot of musicians' problems, attenuators.
Yeah,
that's a really good idea.
I think so, Phil. I know you're going to see a great drummer now, Nico McBrain from Iron Maiden. So you're about to go inside a gig. Thanks so much for giving up your time. It's amazing. Your chat has been absolutely sensational. And again, I'm inspired again, Phil, by you. It's lovely, and we shall catch up very, very soon. I know that. It'd be lovely to see you and give you a massive hug, man. And I'd like to take you out for breakfast. So that means I'm going to, hopefully, if you don't mind, I'll come and stay the evening. We'll listen to some Pat Metheny, and then we'll go out and I'll take you to the Blue Brick and we're going to have some breakfast.
Yeah, man. Listen to As Falls Wichita, So Falls Wichita Falls. Been listening to that lately. Well, I'm sitting under these lights in Islington. I'm not sure. I think the Assembly Hall's in Islington somewhere. But anyway, it worked, didn't it? I'm very sorry I'm sitting in a car because I expected to be at a venue. But yeah, but we'll have a good time. I've got my earplugs. I don't know. It's a side project of Nico's, so we'll see what it's like. It might be like he's got his whole, touring rig in this little gig. But anyway, it's great talking to you, man, and good luck with everything, and good luck with this incredible project, the T- project. It's unbelievably great. And,
Thanks, Phil. Thank
yeah.
you so much for giving your time. And everyone, if you want to catch this, you can see it on YouTube, or you can go to Tinnitus Minus on Instagram, where we'll give you some more information about tonight's chat, or you can see us on our Facebook group, which is T- Tinnitus Wellness Support Group, and we're on LinkedIn. But once again, Phil, lots of love, and thanks ever so much for giving your time. It's lovely. Thank you.
My pleasure, Rip. Lovely to talk to you, mate. Thanks, man.
Bye-bye, man. Bye-bye.
Take care, mate.